do this stuff.
Get out! Security! Who let this kid in here? This area is restricted for doctoral candidates only. This reaction is critical. Notice the color change? Yes, it's turning slightly blue.
The sterile, white walls of the laboratory. It cracked like a whip. Dr. Holloway stood there, pointing a trembling finger at the door, his face flushed with a mix of confusion and indignation. But the kid he was screaming at wasn't lost. He wasn't a delivery boy. He wasn't the janitor's son waiting for a ride home. He was Marcus. And Marcus was holding the localized solution to the polymer stability problem that had stumped Dr. Holloway's entire team for 6 months. Marcus froze. The beaker in his hand didn't shake, but his soul did. For a split second, the genius in his brain shut down, replaced by the survival instinct of a young black man realizing that his intellect was being perceived as a threat. The silence that followed wasn't peaceful. It was violent. It was the sound of 1,000 assumptions crashing into reality. You see, this moment right here? It's not just an awkward misunderstanding. It is a crime scene. But the weapon isn't a gun, and the victim isn't bleeding out on the floor. The weapon is implicit bias, and the victim is the future of science itself. We love to tell stories about individual resilience, about the one hero who fights against the odds. But we never stop to ask, who built the odds? Why is the house always rigged against the player if the player looks a certain way? Before we go any deeper into this investigation, pause the video. Right now. Scroll down and comment, "I'm listening," if you've ever felt like you had to work twice as hard just to get half the respect. I want to see how many of us are in this room together. And while you're down there, hit that subscribe button, because the story we are about to uncover is going to make a lot of people uncomfortable, and we need this truth to spread. Let's rewind. We need to look beyond the textbook. The narrative they feed us is simple. Black students just aren't interested in STEM. The data says the test scores are low. The data says the engagement isn't there. They call it an achievement gap. But that is a lie designed to keep you sleeping. It is not an achievement gap, it is an opportunity gap. It is an expectation gap. When Marcus walked into that lab, Dr. Holloway didn't see a scientist. He saw an intruder. That blindness. That is the invisible force we are investigating today. It's the phantom hand that pushes bright minds out of the pipeline before they even know they have a gift. It's not always a screaming professor. Usually, it's much quieter. It's a guidance counselor in the 10th grade suggesting a vocational track instead of AP physics because it might be too much pressure for you. It's the underfunded middle school where the chemistry lab is a sink with rusty pipes and a textbook from 1998. Think about the mental toll. Imagine having the brainpower to calculate orbital mechanics, but having to use 80% of your processing power just to navigate a space that constantly tells you that you don't belong. That is what we call the tax. And Marcus was paying it in full. He stood his ground that day. He slowly placed the beaker down on the composite countertop. He reached into his pocket, not for a weapon, but for his ID badge. The one that said, "Lead Researcher." The look on Holloway's face changed from anger to something worse, embarrassment. Not the embarrassment of being wrong, but the embarrassment of having his worldview shattered. He didn't apologize. He just grunted and turned back to his computer. But the air in the room had changed. The oxygen was gone. This isn't just about feelings. This is about the hidden hurdles. We are talking about systemic structures that are designed to filter out diversity under the guise of meritocracy. We tell kids that if they study hard, they will succeed. But we don't tell them that the road is paved with invisible landmines. We don't tell them that their curiosity will be interpreted as defiance. We don't tell them that their passion will be seen as aggression. We are investigating a system that is operating exactly as it was designed, to keep the gatekeepers comfortable and the innovators on the outside looking in. Marcus made it into the room, yes. But how many Marcuses did we lose in the 4th grade? How many future Nobel Prize winners are currently sitting in detention because a teacher felt threatened by a question they couldn't answer? We are peeling back the layers of an institutional rot that goes so deep, it's in the foundation of the buildings themselves. This series isn't just about highlighting the problem. It's about exposing the machinery so we can dismantle it. We are going to talk about the pipeline. We are going to talk about the funding. We are going to talk about the psychological warfare of being the only one in the room. Marcus picked up his notebook and began to work, but the joy was gone. The discovery was tainted. He realized then that his fight wasn't just against the laws of physics, it was against the laws of a society that refused to see him. But here is the thing about geniuses like Marcus, they notice patterns. And Marcus just realized that the biggest variable in his equation wasn't the polymer. It was the people standing in his way. You think Dr. Holloway was the villain of this story? You think that was the worst it gets? Wait until you hear what happened when Marcus tried to publish his findings. He's just not a good fit for the advanced program. He's too energetic. That is the sentence that almost ended Marcus's career before he even learned long division. It wasn't a peer review board. It wasn't a doctoral defense. It was a kindergarten teacher in a parent-teacher conference, looking Marcus's mother dead in the eye and telling her that her son's curiosity was actually a behavioral issue. 5-year-old Marcus wasn't disrupting the class. He was dismantling the toy clock to see how the gears meshed together. He was engineering. But where the teacher saw a future scientist in the white students, she saw a future problem in Marcus. This is the moment the pipeline starts to leak. It doesn't explode. It drips, slowly draining the potential out of our communities, one realistic expectation at a time. This is the silent killer of black brilliance. We talk about the lack of diversity in Silicon Valley or the empty seats in medical schools, but we rarely look at the crime scene in the first grade. By the time Marcus hit middle school, the sabotage was systematic. He requested AP algebra. The guidance counselor, a woman who smiled too much but never listened, suggested remedial shop class. She told him, "Let's focus on trade skills, Marcus. Let's get you something steady." She didn't see the mind that would one day solve a decade-old biochemical riddle. She saw a demographic. She saw a statistic she needed to manage. If you have ever had a teacher tell you to lower your aim, to settle for less than you were worth, I want you to destroy the like button right now and comment, "I am more," down below. Let them know we are watching. The system relies on exhaustion. It relies on the parents being too tired from working 2 jobs to fight the school board. It relies on the student internalizing the doubt until they believe the lie. Marcus was lucky. His mother fought. She marched into that principal's office with the fire of 1,000 suns and demanded he be tested. He scored in the 99th percentile. The principal didn't apologize. He just looked annoyed that his filing system was disrupted. But for every Marcus who breaks through the concrete, there are thousands of brilliant minds trapped beneath it, filtered out by underfunded schools where the chemistry labs have no chemicals and the textbooks are older than the students reading them. By high school, the isolation had set in. Marcus looked around his AP physics class. He was the only speck of pepper in a sea of salt. This is the pipeline problem in action. It's a lonely ascent. The other black students had been siphoned off years ago, discouraged by the implicit bias of advisors or suspended for minor infractions that their white counterparts were laughed at for. Marcus wasn't just learning physics, he was learning how to survive in hostile territory. He had to be twice as good to get half the credit. If he raised his hand, he was aggressive. If he stayed silent, he was disengaged. He walked a tightrope over a canyon of systemic failure, knowing that one slip meant he was just another at-risk youth who didn't make it. This brings us back to the present. To the lab. To the dean's email glowing on his phone screen. That feeling in Marcus's gut? That cold, heavy stone? It wasn't new. He had felt it in kindergarten when they took his blocks away. He felt it in the counselor's office. It is the visceral reaction to a system that views his success as a threat to the natural order. The professor who profiled him wasn't an anomaly. He was the final boss in a game Marcus had been playing since he was 5 years old. The professor saw a trespasser because the system had spent 20 years trying to keep Marcus out. Marcus stared at the email. Immediate suspension pending investigation of intellectual property theft. The words blurred. Theft. He had solved the equation. It was his mind, his late nights, his genius. But the institution was doing what it was designed to do: protect its own. They were accusing him of stealing his own breakthrough. The narrative was shifting in real time. They were going to paint him not as the discoverer, but as the thief. The pipeline wasn't just leaking anymore, it was trying to drown him. He looked at the hard drive containing his data, the only proof of his work. He could hear footsteps coming down the hallway. Heavy steps. Security. He had seconds to make a choice. If he handed over the drive, the university would bury him and claim the discovery for the department chair. If he ran, he looked guilty. But Marcus didn't survive the sabotage of kindergarten, the bias of middle school, and the isolation of high school to fold now. He grabbed the hard drive, shoved it into his hoodie pocket, and moved toward the back exit. But as his hand touched the door handle, the main entrance swiped open. Wait until you hear who walked through that door. Let's be realistic, Marcus. People from your neighborhood don't become aerospace engineers. Have you considered the technical college? They have a great HVAC program. The words hung in the air like smoke. Suffocating. Toxic. Marcus sat there, clutching a transcript that screamed excellence, straight A's, perfect attendance, a mind that dreamed in calculus and breathed in aerodynamics. But the man sitting across the desk, Mr. Henderson, wasn't looking at the grades. He was looking at the zip code. He was looking at the hoodie. He was looking at a statistic, not a student. This is the moment where the dream usually dies. Not with a bang, but with a whisper. A soft, patronizing suggestion to stay in your lane. Picture the scene. It's 2 p.m. on a Tuesday. The guidance counselor's office smells like stale coffee and low expectations. Marcus had walked in there with his heart pounding, ready to ask for the AP Physics sign-up sheet. He had the prerequisites. He had the drive. He had spent his nights watching launches on YouTube, analyzing thruster ratios while sirens wailed outside his window. He didn't see the poverty around him. He saw the escape velocity required to leave it. But Mr. Henderson? He just saw a kid who was reaching too high. He adjusted his glasses, tapped a pen on the desk, and delivered that fatal line. Be realistic. Hit that subscribe button right now if you've ever had someone in authority tell you that your dreams were too big for someone like you. Because this isn't just Marcus's story. This is the story of thousands of black students every single year. We call it the pipeline problem, but that's a passive way to describe an active demolition. It's not a leak. It's a filter. A filter designed to strip mine confidence before a student even steps foot on a college campus. It starts here. In these small quiet rooms where gatekeepers decide who gets to be a genius and who gets steered toward steady hands-on work. Marcus looked at the HVAC brochure slid across the desk. It was glossy, colorful, safe. For a second, just a split second, the poison entered his bloodstream. He thought, maybe he's right. Maybe I am tripping. Maybe guys like me don't design rockets. We fix the air conditioning in the building where other people design rockets. The doubt is the weapon. It's invisible, silent, and it kills more careers than tuition costs ever could. Mr. Henderson wasn't being mean. He wasn't yelling racial slurs. He thought he was being benevolent. He thought he was saving Marcus from failure. And that is the most dangerous kind of bias, the kind that disguises itself as protection. But then, something shifted. Marcus looked at the clock on the wall. Tick, tick, tick. He thought about his grandfather, who fixed cars for 50 years so Marcus wouldn't have to. He thought about the late nights studying by flashlight when the power was cut. He felt the weight of that brochure, and it felt like an anchor. He didn't pick it up. He looked Mr. Henderson dead in the eye. The silence stretched out, uncomfortable and heavy. This was the precipice. This was the moment the trajectory changed. Comment, I am capable, down below, if you refuse to let a system define your worth. We need to flood the comments with that energy because what Marcus did next requires a level of courage that most adults don't possess. He didn't scream. He didn't flip the desk. He reached into his backpack and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. It was a printout of the admission requirements for MIT. He placed it directly on top of the HVAC brochure, covering it completely. He pointed to the math scores. I have these, he said, his voice shaking just a little, but gaining strength with every syllable. He pointed to the science requirements. I have these too. He leaned forward, encroaching on Mr. Henderson's comfortable, gatekeeping space. I don't need you to be realistic for me, sir. I need you to sign the AP Physics form. That is your job. To advise. Not to decide. The air left the room. Mr. Henderson blinked, stunned. He wasn't used to pushback. He was used to nodding heads and lowered eyes. He was used to students accepting the limitations he placed on them as if they were laws of nature. But Marcus had just rewritten the laws of physics in that office. Action and reaction. The force of his self-belief collided with the wall of systemic bias, and the wall cracked. Mr. Henderson hesitated. His pen hovered over the form. He looked at Marcus, really looked at him, for the first time. He saw the fire. He saw the defiance that comes from knowing exactly who you are in a world that tries to tell you otherwise. With a sigh that sounded like defeat, Mr. Henderson signed the paper. He slid it back across the desk, not making eye contact this time. Don't say I didn't warn you, he muttered. It's a rigorous course. Most students, like you, drop out by midterms. Marcus took the paper. It felt like a golden ticket. It felt like a declaration of war. He walked out of that office, the brochure for the technical college left forgotten on the desk, a piece of trash in the wake of his ambition. He thought the battle was won. He thought getting the signature was the hardest part. He thought walking into that classroom would be his victory lap. But as he stepped into the hallway, clutching that permission slip, he had no idea that the real test hadn't even started. The system has layers, like an onion, and every layer is designed to make you cry. He had bypassed the gatekeeper, yes. But now he had to survive the arena. He walked toward the science wing, the paper burning a hole in his hand. He was the only black student headed in that direction. The bell rang. The doors to the AP Physics lab opened. And as he walked in, the teacher, a man with a reputation for breaking spirits, looked up from his desk. He didn't smile. He didn't say welcome. He looked at Marcus, then looked at the roster, and then said something that would haunt him for the rest of the semester. Wait until you hear what happened next. You don't look like a physicist. That's exactly what the department chair said to Marcus on the first day of his PhD program. Not, welcome. Not, we're glad you're here. Just a cold stare over rimless glasses and a sentence that hit like a punch to the gut. Marcus laughed it off. He had to. That's the survival mechanism. He forced a smile, adjusted his backpack, and walked into the orientation hall. But when he opened those heavy oak doors, the air left his lungs. He scanned the room. Row 1. Row 2. Row 10. Nothing. In a sea of 300 aspiring scientists, Marcus was a singular, isolated drop of ink in a glass of milk. He looked for a familiar nod, a shared glance, just one other person who understood the weight he was carrying. There was no one. The silence in his head was deafening. This wasn't just a lack of diversity. This was an erasure. Welcome to the echo chamber. This is where the dream goes to die, not with a bang, but with a whisper. You see, everyone talks about getting black students into college. They talk about admission rates and scholarships like they're the golden ticket. But nobody talks about what happens when the cameras turn off and the brochure photos are taken. Nobody warns you about the day the black students disappeared. It's not a magic trick. It's not a rapture. It is a systematic, quiet removal that happens in the shadows of lecture halls and the closed doors of faculty lounges. Marcus sat down in that lecture hall, pulling his notebook out, his hands shaking just slightly. He told himself he belonged. He told himself he earned this. But the system was already winding up to prove him wrong. Think about the last time you walked into a room and felt like everyone was waiting for you to fail. It's a heavy feeling, right? Drop a comment below if you've ever been the only one in a room. I want to know where you guys are listening from and if you felt that cold shoulder. Because for Marcus, it wasn't just a feeling. It was policy. The first semester was a blur of microaggressions that acted like paper cuts. Thousands of them. A professor confusing him with the janitorial staff. A lab partner asking if he got in on a diversity quota. These weren't accidents. They were signals. They were telling him, you are a guest here, and guests eventually leave. By the midterm exams, the 5 other black undergraduates Marcus knew from the general science track? Gone. Vanished. He texted David. No reply. He saw Sarah working at the campus coffee shop instead of the biolab. She told him she switched to liberal arts. The advisor told me I wasn't cut out for the rigors of STEM, she said, wiping down a counter. He said I'd be happier somewhere less intense. That word. Intense. It's code. It's a gatekeeper's favorite weapon. They didn't fail because they weren't smart. They were pushed out by advisors who looked at their skin color and saw a risk, not a researcher. They were steered away from the hard sciences before they even took the first test. It wasn't a pipeline problem. It was a filtration system designed to catch them and toss them aside. And then came the funding incident. This is where it gets dark. Marcus needed a research grant to finish his thesis. He had the grades. He had the proposal. He had the passion. He applied for the departmental fellowship, the one meant to support promising young minds. He waited weeks. He checked his email every hour. Finally, the notification came. Regret to inform you. Denied. A week later, he walked past the lab of a classmate, a guy named Chad who skipped half the lectures and borrowed Marcus's notes. Chad was popping champagne. He got the full ride. The full grant. Marcus later found out the selection committee was entirely white, entirely over the age of 60, and entirely convinced that merit looked a certain way. It's the invisible hand of the institution. It's not a burning cross on the lawn, it's a budget meeting where resources are allocated to the safe bets. It's the mentorship programs that rely on culture fit, which is just a fancy way of saying people who look like us. Marcus realized he wasn't fighting against a subject, he was fighting against a fortress. He was starving for mentorship, starving for resources, while his peers were feasting at a banquet he wasn't invited to. He started to doubt his own mind. Maybe they were right. Maybe he didn't belong? That is the most dangerous weapon of all, when the system makes you turn on yourself. But Marcus didn't leave. He got angry. He realized that his presence was an act of rebellion. Every day he walked into that lab, he was protesting. He started digging into the university's public records. He looked at the tenure track. 0 black professors in the physics department for 30 years. 30 years. He looked at the dropout rates. Black students were leaving STEM majors at double the rate of their white peers, despite entering with the same GPA. The data was screaming, but the administration was wearing earplugs. They called it attrition. Marcus called it a purge. He finally confronted his advisor during his final review. He laid it all out. The bias. The lack of support. The way the department felt like a country club he had crashed. His advisor sighed, took off his glasses, and gave him a look of pity. Marcus, he said, science is objective. It doesn't care about your feelings. Maybe you're just being too sensitive. Too sensitive. That was the final straw. That was the moment Marcus realized that no matter how many equations he solved, he would never be seen as equal within these walls. He packed his bag. He walked out of that office with his heart pounding in his throat. He had survived the university, but he was battered. He was bruised. And he was about to step into the real world, thinking the worst was over. He thought the corporate world would be different. He thought money meant meritocracy. He was wrong. Dead wrong. If you think the university was a nightmare, wait until you hear what happened when he walked into his first interview at a top-tier tech firm. He thought he had escaped the echo chamber, but he was walking straight into a trap. Wait until you hear what happened next. Excuse me, the cleaning crew isn't supposed to be in here until after 5. The words hung in the air like toxic smoke. Marcus froze. His hand was halfway to the front row desk, gripping a TI-89 calculator and a pristine copy of the Advanced Thermodynamics syllabus. He wasn't holding a mop. He wasn't wearing a uniform. He was wearing a button-down shirt and the weight of his entire family's expectations. But Professor Holloway, the tenured giant of the engineering department, didn't see a student. He didn't see a future innovator. He saw a stereotype. He saw an intruder. Marcus looked around the lecture hall. 300 seats. Stadium style. Bright, sterile lights that hummed with anxiety. And in that sea of faces, Marcus was the only speck of pepper in a bowl of salt. He felt the heat rising in his neck. Not anger. Shame. A burning, irrational shame for existing in a space that was actively trying to reject him. He slowly held up his student ID. "I'm registered for this class, sir," he said, his voice steady but quiet. The professor squinted, adjusted his glasses, and muttered a half-hearted apology before turning his back to write on the board. He didn't even look Marcus in the eye. That's the first lesson black students learn in STEM. Sometimes, the loudest message isn't what they say to you. It's how quickly they dismiss you. This is the reality of the institutional echo chamber. We talk about getting kids into college, but we rarely talk about the psychological warfare waiting for them inside the gates. Marcus sat in the front row every single day. He had to. He knew that if he sat in the back, he'd be seen as disengaged. If he asked too many questions, he was disruptive. If he asked too few, he was lost. He was walking a tightrope over a canyon, and the wind was blowing from every direction. Then came the phrase that strikes terror into the heart of every minority student in a predominantly white institution. "All right, everyone, find a partner for the semester project." The room exploded into chaos. Chairs scraped against the floor. Excited whispers filled the air. It was a social frenzy. Students gravitated toward their friends, their frat brothers, the people who looked like them. It's human nature, right? Wrong. It's a systemic exclusion that happens in real time. Marcus sat frozen. He watched eyes dart over him and move on. It wasn't hostile. It was worse. It was indifferent. To them, he was invisible. He was a ghost haunting the front row. He swallowed his pride and walked up to a group of 3 guys laughing near the door. "Hey, do you guys need a 4th?" One guy looked at his shoes. The other checked his phone. Finally, the third one spoke up, offering a tight, polite smile. "Sorry, man. We're actually looking for someone with strong coding skills. It's going to be a heavy build." Marcus had placed first in the district hackathon in high school. He knew Python better than he knew English. He could have coded circles around them in his sleep. But he didn't argue. He didn't pull out his resume. He just nodded and walked away. Why fight for a seat at a table where they've already removed your chair? If you've ever been the most qualified person in the room but were treated like a charity case, hit that subscribe button right now. We need to know we aren't shouting into the void. Drop a comment telling us where you're listening from, because your story matters here. This isolation isn't an accident. It's a feature of the system. It grinds you down. Marcus went to office hours. He went to the tutoring center. He did everything the brochures said to do. But when he applied for the undergraduate research fellowship, the golden ticket to a PhD program, he hit the wall. He had a 3.8 GPA. His essay was flawless. He waited 3 weeks for the email. When it came, it was a generic form letter. Denied. Later that day, he saw the list of accepted students posted in the hallway. The dean's nephew was on it. A guy Marcus tutored in calculus was on it. The message was crystal clear. Meritocracy is a myth when the game is rigged by relationships you were never invited to form. That night, Marcus sat in his dorm room, staring at the rejection letter. This is the breaking point for so many. This is where the pipeline leaks. It's not because the work is too hard. It's because the emotional tax is too high. You start asking, do I belong here? Instead of, do they deserve me? He was ready to pack his bags. He was ready to switch majors to something easier, something where he wouldn't have to fight for the right to breathe. But then, a knock came at his door. It was Sarah. Sarah was a senior, the president of the Black Engineers Society, a club that met in the basement of the student union because the university wouldn't give them a proper room. She saw the letter on his desk and didn't offer pity. She offered a weapon. She laughed, a cold, hard sound that sent shivers down Marcus's spine. You think you didn't get the fellowship because you aren't good enough? She asked, sliding a thick manila folder across his desk. You got rejected because you applied through the front door. Let me show you how this department really works. Marcus opened the folder. Inside wasn't a study guide. It was a list of names. A list of donors. And a paper trail showing exactly where the department funding was really going. Marcus realized this wasn't just about grades anymore. He had stumbled into a war zone. And he was about to fire the first shot. Wait until you hear what he found in those files. We don't fund community projects here, doctor. We fund hard science. Those were the words that ended a career before it even truly began. Imagine standing in front of a review board, holding a proposal that could cure hypertension in at-risk communities, a breakthrough that could save thousands of lives, only to be told your life's work is nothing more than charity. This isn't just a rejection letter. This is an eviction notice from the world of innovation. We have spent the last few chapters looking at the classroom, looking at the isolation of the black student in the lecture hall, but now we have to talk about the currency of survival. Money. Grants. The green light that turns a hypothesis into a discovery. Without it, the lab lights go out. Without it, the research stops. Without it, you don't exist. You think science is a meritocracy. You think the best ideas naturally rise to the top like cream? Wake up. The ivory tower has a basement, and that is where the gatekeepers live. We are talking about the grant gap, a statistical chasm so wide it swallows entire generations of black brilliance. Let's look at Dr. Eris. Top of his class at MIT. Published in Nature before he turned 25. A genius by every metric the system claims to value. He submits an R01 grant application to the National Institutes of Health. His methodology is flawless. His team is ready. But the feedback comes back, and it chills your blood. They didn't attack his math. They didn't attack his chemistry. They attacked the significance. They said the topic, sickle cell research focused on minority populations, was too niche. Too specific. Not generalizable enough. Meanwhile, his colleague, a man with half the publications and a quarter of the citations, gets fully funded to study a condition that affects a fraction of the population, but a wealthier, whiter fraction. This is the silent killer of diversity in STEM. It is not always a burning cross, sometimes it is a bureaucratic form stamp that says, not discussed. When black researchers submit proposals, they are statistically significantly less likely to be funded than their white counterparts with the exact same credentials. It is a documented fact. The system hides behind words like fit and prestige. If you didn't come from the right lab, if you don't have the right mentor making the phone call, your application goes to the bottom of the pile. It is an echo chamber of privilege where the rich labs get richer and the innovative, diverse labs starve to death. Comment, break the cycle, down below if you've ever seen a qualified person passed over because they didn't know the right people. I want to see where you all stand on this. The psychological toll this takes is devastating. Imagine the prove it again bias on steroids. You have to write 3 times as many grants to get half as much money. You are spending your nights writing proposals instead of doing the actual science, running on caffeine and anxiety, knowing that one more rejection means you have to fire your grad students. It means telling a young black PhD candidate that you can't pay them next semester. It means the pipeline we talked about earlier doesn't just leak, it is being deliberately blocked. These gatekeepers aren't just withholding money, they are curating the future. They are deciding whose questions get answered and whose problems get solved. And when the people holding the purse strings all look the same, the solutions they pay for only work for people who look like them. But here is where it gets even darker. When black scientists try to play the game, when they try to pivot their research to fit what the gatekeepers want, they are accused of lacking focus. If they stick to their passion, they are accused of being too narrow. It is a catch-22 designed to induce failure. We spoke to an anonymous researcher, let's call her Sarah. She told us that after her 3rd rejection, she was pulled aside by a senior faculty member, a mentor, who told her, maybe you're just not cut out for the rigor of our one research. Have you considered teaching at a smaller college? They frame systemic exclusion as individual incompetence. They gaslight you into thinking your inability to break through a steel door is because you aren't knocking hard enough. Subscribe to the channel right now if you want to see these stories exposed, because the mainstream media isn't covering this. They talk about diversity quotas, they don't talk about funding strangulation. We are watching brilliant minds leave the field, not because they couldn't hack the science, but because they couldn't hack the politics. They take their talents elsewhere, or they burn out entirely, leaving the academy whiter and more insular than before. Sarah didn't leave because she wasn't smart enough. She left because she refused to beg for scraps at a table she helped build. So, the university pushes them out. The funding dries up. The lab closes. The dream of academic tenure is dead. Naturally, you would think the private sector is the savior. You would think that tech giants and big pharma, with their diversity statements and Super Bowl commercials about equality, would be waiting with open arms to scoop up this talent. You would think that leaving the university would finally level the playing field. But wait until you hear what happened when they walked into the corporate boardroom. Is he the diversity hire? The whisper wasn't meant to be heard. But in the sterile, acoustic silence of a server room, sound travels like a bullet. Tyrell froze. His hand hovered over the keyboard, suspended in mid-air. The cursor on his screen blinked, mocking him. This wasn't a random troll in a comment section. This was his team lead. The man who was supposed to be his mentor. The man who smiled in his face every morning and asked about his weekend. Imagine that feeling. The cold sweat. The sudden crushing realization that your 4.0 GPA, your sleepless nights, your 3 internships, and your master's degree. In their eyes, it all amounted to a single checkbox. A quota. A favor. Tyrell didn't turn around. He couldn't. Because if he did, he knew he might lose everything he had fought 20 years to build. Welcome back to the story the industry tries to bury. If you are new here, we are exposing the brutal reality of being black in STEM, and today, we are walking through the glass doors of the corporate world. You think the university struggle was hard? You think the underfunded high schools were the biggest hurdle? No. The most dangerous trap is the one that looks like success. Tyrell had survived the pipeline. He was the anomaly. He was the 1 in a million who slipped through the cracks of a broken system and landed the 6-figure job at a top-tier tech firm. He did everything society told him to do. He pulled himself up by his bootstraps. But he quickly learned that when you pull yourself up, you just make yourself a taller target. Drop a comment right now with, I see you, if you've ever felt judged before you even opened your mouth. Because that is the reality for Tyrell. Every day was an audition. Psychologists call it the prove it again bias. Here is how it works. When Tyrell's white colleague, let's call him Jared, wrote code that crashed the system, it was called a learning opportunity. Everyone laughed. They bought Jared coffee. But when Tyrell made a syntax error, silence, stares, the manager would document it. "We just want to make sure you're up to speed," they'd say with fake concern. They weren't looking for bugs in his code, they were looking for flaws in his existence. They were mining for evidence to prove that he didn't belong. It is a psychological warfare that leaves no bruises but breaks your spirit. Tyrell stopped speaking in meetings. Why bother? Last week, he suggested a new architecture for the database. The room went quiet. They moved on. 10 minutes later, Jared suggested the exact same thing. The room erupted in applause. Genius, Jared. Why didn't we think of that? Tyrell sat there, invisible, screaming on the inside. This is the echo chamber of the corporate elite. It is not a meritocracy. It is a mirrored room where they only recognize genius when it looks like them. And the toll? It is called the black tax. It is the emotional exhaustion of having to be twice as good to get half the credit. Tyrell was the first one in, the last one out, double-checking every email for tone so he wouldn't be labeled aggressive, scrubbing his personality until he was just a hollow shell of compliance. But the breaking point wasn't the stolen ideas. It wasn't even the whispers. It was the review. 6 months in, Tyrell walked into the glass office, notebook in hand, ready to show his metrics. He had outperformed the entire junior team. His efficiency was up 20%. He had saved the company thousands in cloud storage fees. He sat down, expecting a promotion. Or at least a good job. The manager sighed, sliding a piece of paper across the desk. "Tyrell, you're technically sound," he said, avoiding eye contact. "But you're just not a culture fit." Culture fit. The weaponized phrase of the modern gatekeeper. It means you make us uncomfortable because you are different. It means we don't want to grab a beer with you. It means get out. Tyrell felt the room spin. He looked at the paper. Average scores. Meets expectations. They were gaslighting him on paper. Erasing his excellence with a pen stroke. He walked out of that office and went straight to the bathroom. He looked in the mirror and didn't recognize the man staring back. The spark was gone. The love for science, for discovery, for building the future. It was being strangled by the politics of the present. He went back to his desk, ready to type his resignation letter. He was done. The system had won. They had successfully pushed him out, just like they pushed out thousands before him. The pipeline doesn't just leak, it purges. He opened his email, his finger trembling over the send button. He was going to leave STEM. Maybe teach. Maybe drive a truck. Anything but this constant devaluation. But just as he was about to click send, a notification popped up on his private Slack channel. It was a message from an encrypted user handle he didn't recognize. No name. No photo. Just 3 words that froze his blood and changed the trajectory of his entire life. Check the payroll. Tyrell hesitated. He knew he shouldn't. He knew it was dangerous. But his heart was pounding against his ribs like a sledgehammer. He clicked the attachment. Rows and rows of data flooded his screen. Salaries. Bonuses. Demographics. And there it was. In black and white. The undeniable proof that the game wasn't just rigged socially, it was rigged financially. He saw what Jared was making. He saw what the other culture fits were making. And then he saw his own number. The rage that filled him wasn't hot, it was cold. It was precise. He looked up at the camera in the corner of the room, realizing this wasn't just about him anymore. This was a crime scene. He moved his mouse away from the resignation letter. He wasn't quitting. Not today. He picked up his phone and dialed the number at the bottom of the encrypted document. He didn't know who was on the other end, but he knew one thing. War had just been declared. Wait until you hear who picked up the phone. We're looking for a culture fit, and frankly, he just makes people uncomfortable. That was the last thing the hiring manager said before dropping the resume of a 4.0 GPA engineering graduate into the recycling bin. He didn't even shred it. He just crumpled it. A lifetime of late nights, skipped meals, and defying the odds, treated like garbage because his name was Jamal and his hair was locked. They call it meritocracy. We call it the final gate. Welcome to Chapter 8. This is the resume they threw in the trash. Imagine standing at the foot of a mountain. You have climbed it barefoot. You have dodged avalanches of underfunded classrooms, navigated the minefield of guidance counselors who told you to aim lower, and survived the thin air of a university department where you were the only black face in the lecture hall. You reach the summit. You hold the degree. You have done everything the system demanded of you. You are exhausted, but you are triumphant. You reach for the flag, the job offer that promises generational wealth and stability. And then, a hand pushes you off the ledge. This isn't fiction. This is the reality for thousands of Black STEM graduates every single year. We spent the last 7 chapters talking about the classroom, but the most dangerous battlefield isn't the school, it's the office. Let me introduce you to Marcus. Marcus isn't just smart, he is a prodigy. He can code in 3 languages and dreams in algorithms. He graduated with honors. But when Marcus sits across the table from a hiring panel in Silicon Valley, they don't see a prodigy. They see a risk. They see someone they have to take a chance on. Why is it that a white student with a C average is potential, but a black student with an A average is a risk? Drop a comment right now if you've ever had to work twice as hard to get half the recognition. I want to see your stories down below. Here is the heartbreaking truth about the transition from academia to industry. It is the prove it again bias. Marcus gets the job, miraculously. But the fight has just begun. While his peers are given mentorship and leeway to make mistakes, Marcus is under a microscope. Every typo in an email is treated as proof of incompetence. Every question he asks is viewed as a lack of knowledge. He is forced to reprove his intelligence every single morning he swipes his badge. The emotional labor of navigating a predominantly white workspace is a second full-time job that he doesn't get paid for. And let's talk about the pay. The data is sickening. Black professionals in STEM are consistently paid less than their white counterparts for the exact same roles. It's the black tax in real time. But the system gaslights them. It tells them, if you were just a little more articulate, or, if you just networked better, you'd be in the corner office. It is a lie designed to keep the gate locked. They want the diversity on the brochure, but they don't want the diversity in the boardroom. But wait until you hear what happened when Marcus decided to stop playing their game. This is where the story shifts. This is where we stop asking for a seat at the table and start building our own house. The narrative of the pipeline problem suggests there aren't enough qualified black candidates. That is a myth invented to absolve corporations of their laziness. The talent is there. The resumes are there. They are just in the trash can. Systemic exclusion requires systemic dismantling. We are seeing a new wave of power rising. It's not just about diversity training, which is often just a bandage on a bullet hole. It is about blind hiring practices. It is about salary transparency. It is about holding leadership accountable not for intentions, but for numbers. Marcus didn't stay at that company. He left. He took his brilliance, his culture, and his genius, and he founded a startup that specifically recruits from the HBCUs the tech giants ignored. He didn't just climb the ladder, he built a new elevator. But individual heroism isn't enough. We need policy. We need federal funding linked to equitable hiring. We need to strip the tax breaks from companies that refuse to diversify their leadership. We need to stop applauding them for doing the bare minimum. The journey through the STEM system for a black student is a gauntlet of invisible fires. From the kindergarten teacher who ignores their raised hand, to the professor who assumes they are in the wrong class, to the manager who throws their resume away. But here is the secret they don't want you to know. The system fights so hard to keep them out because it knows how powerful they are. They are terrified of what happens when that genius is finally unleashed without restraint. We have walked through the fire together over these 8 chapters. We have exposed the rot in the foundation. Now, the ball is in your court. You have the knowledge. You see the invisible forces. Do not let the story end here. Advocate. Speak up. Challenge the culture fit narrative in your own workplace. Because the next Einstein, the next Katherine Johnson, the next Marcus is out there right now, waiting for the door to open. Don't let them slam it in their face. The moral of the story is simple. Talent is equally distributed, but opportunity is not. A system that throws genius in the trash because of the color of its skin is a system that deserves to be dismantled brick by brick. We don't need permission to be great. We never did. If this series opened your eyes, if you felt the heat of this truth, hit that like button until it breaks. Share this with a teacher, a boss, or a student who needs to hear it. And make sure you are subscribed to Beat Stories with notifications on. We tell the stories the world tries to hide. Until next time.